Welcome back. You're watching One on One. We're talking with former Secretary of State of the US, Madeleine Albright. I wanted to ask you, how important was it for you to become a US citizen finally in 1957 when you traveled across the world, your parents had been through quite a lot? Getting that US citizenship, did it mean a lot at the time? Were you aware
I think
of it?
it really was the defining moment in my life. We had traveled so much, and I'd never felt that I had roots particularly. When we came here, and I was 11 years old in '48, I wanted so much to be an American. I had learned my English in England, so I had a very British accent, and I stood out. And when we moved to Colorado, I kind of deliberately lost my British accent and just wanted to be an American teenager. And I didn't become an American until I was in college and a junior. But it was a huge defining moment, and I love being an American. And there are times, you know, when Czechoslovakia had its Velvet Revolution and now the Czech Republic, I love going back, and there's a lot about me that's very Czech. But it's very clear that I grew up a free American.
Of course, your father's there, the diplomatic influence was there, but did you know you'd take that sort of path by then?
No, because what I actually wanted to do was to be a foreign correspondent. I was fascinated by foreign policy. That's all we ever talked about, frankly, at home. I mean, other people may have other dinner discussions, but that is what we talked about. And I loved the idea of journalism, and I was engaged to somebody who was a journalist, so I thought that would be the fun path. But I was diverted from it, frankly, because even though I had gone to work on a small newspaper while he was in the Army, when we got to Chicago, his managing editor said, "So what are you going to do, honey?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to work on a newspaper." And he said, "I don't think so, because guild regulations prevent you from working on the same paper as your husband." And at that time, there were 3 other newspapers. He said, "And you certainly wouldn't want to compete with him." And the truth is, I didn't even blink. I just agreed. I can think of many things I'd say at this point, but I started on something else.
Now, was the political environment when you first got into it that much different from what you see now in terms of the kind of role a woman could take, the kind of position you could aim for?
Totally different. I mean, there weren't a lot of women in campaigns, which is where I really started, and then later even on staffs of members of Congress. I went to work at a certain point for Senator Ed Muskie, and it was a really big deal that I was his chief legislative assistant and as a woman, and then later he hired a legal counsel for the Budget Committee, but there weren't a lot of women around, and there certainly weren't a lot of women in foreign policy.
Now, becoming the first woman to become Secretary of State of the country, how much of a challenge was it to take on the diehards, the people who really thought it was still a male-dominated environment?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people thought that I'd have trouble with foreign men, especially in the Middle East. And as it turned out, I didn't have any problems there. I arrived in a large plane that said United States of America, but I represented the U.S. and I was treated with great respect and kindness and developed a lot of friends. In some ways, I had more problems with the men in our own government because they had seen me evolve from being a carpool mother or staffer or whatever, and all of a sudden I was Secretary of State. And I don't think could credit the fact that I'd actually earned it. And so there were some people here, I think, who kind of wondered, you know, how come? And I still think they do.
Now, it's an interesting thing a lot of people around the world wonder. Here we have the US, you know, supposedly the most progressive country in the world, and yet it still hasn't had a female president, whereas so many developing countries already have. So I wonder what your view is on that. Why has it taken so long for the US?
I have no idea, and it's, I think, a source of great embarrassment, should be, and I hope it's changed very soon. But as Americans always think that we're way ahead on everything, and I often point out just what you said, is the number of countries that have women presidents or prime ministers. But when I was, well, at various times, when I first got to the UN, I thought that I would get all the women permanent representatives together. And there were 183 countries there when I got there, and I thought there were going to be lots of women. And it turned out there were only 6 other women. So I created a caucus. I called it the G7. And then I created a group of women foreign ministers. So it isn't as if there are that many, because at our height, now I think there are more, there were 14. So it's a slow process everywhere, but the U.S. is definitely not in the lead.
Did you yourself, have you embraced technology? Do you like the way things have gone?
I'm kind of half there. I obviously do a lot of, well, more word processing, and then I Google things, but I'm a professor, and what I find very hard to deal with, so it makes me sound like a real old fogey, is I don't really understand the value of research anymore, where I'm one of the people that used to go to a library and look through the card catalogs and search out the books, and so I find it a little hard in doing research of not being able to really touch the books, and so I'm not exactly thoroughly modern Millie here.
But you do enjoy teaching. It's something you've gone back
I like
to
teaching a lot. I do a lot of different things. I have a business, and I'm chairman of the NDI board, and the National Democratic Institute, and on Aspen board, and various other things. But I teach one course a semester, and I like it very much.
What do you get out of it? I mean, of course, you're in touch with the young generation, but what does it do for you?
I think it keeps my thinking honest, because one of the things when you are in a campaign or representing an administration, you really you know what the line is. You have to develop a message, and you're certainly aware of the arguments against what you're doing, but you are there pushing an idea. With students, and I tell them, at first they're a little frightened of me, and I say, you know, the thing that I really respect are people who disagree with me, and so it's challenging. They're sitting there writing something down, so you think you've got to tell it to them straight. And there is the excitement of dealing with younger people.
Now, is there anything you've wanted to do in your life that you haven't had a chance to, that you're saying, well, look, I have to give myself time to do this at some point?
Well, something that I will never do, but I wish I had, and that is run for public office myself. Because it's one thing to be appointed, it's another to have people select you. But I've lived in Washington since 1968, and this is not the place, and so that's never going to happen. But mostly, you know, there are things like, you know, that everybody says, like, I wish I could go back and relearn playing the piano or whatever, but I'm pretty content with what I'm doing and how I'm spending my time. And it took me a long time to get an independent voice, and I now have it. And for a number of reasons, people are interested in what I have to say, and I have a way of explaining my views, and what could be better than that?
Now, stepping out of that front line, when you're in the position you're in now, do you find it easier to say the things you've wanted to say and have been, you know, really would like to say, which you sometimes had to just bite your tongue when you were actually there?
Well, not because of disagreement, but the truth is that when you are the Secretary of State, and every word that you say is determinant of American foreign policy, and sometimes, believe it or not, it's taken out of context and it ends up on the front page of a newspaper or on a headline, then you are really careful. And what I have found is a sense of freedom of being able to not have my thoughts have to go through a grid to see, is this really what American policy is or what it should be? But obviously, you know, I'm pretty clear about what I say, and I don't have a lot of totally wacky ideas. I express myself in the way I want to, but there is obviously much more freedom when you are not trying to represent your country.
Now, if you had the chance now, or I mean, it may just come up, would you take on another diplomatic position like that again?
Well, it's, you know, I don't think about it because it's not likely to happen. I mean, being Secretary of State is truly, I have to say, the best job in the world. And it doesn't happen twice. And so I wouldn't expect it. But if the next president would ask me to do some diplomatic mission in a way that I could be helpful, obviously I'd do that.
And when it comes down to a legacy, you know, how you'd like to be remembered, what would you want people to remember you for?
I think that, without being overly pretentious here, that some of the actions that I took actually saved the lives of some people, and that I did make a difference. And I know a place I did make a difference was in Kosovo. So that is one of the things that I'm very proud of. And I still would like to be in a position where I can use this voice that I now have to make a difference. Because what I'm finding more and more, that the worst problem in the world is the gap between the rich and the poor. And, you know, if we were all rich, it would be nice. If we were all poor, it would be too bad, but we'd all be the same. But because the poor, as a result of information, know what the rich have, that gap is causing so many of the problems that we have to deal with. So that's what I'm going to be speaking out on more and more.
Madam Secretary, thank you very much for your time. Enjoyed talking with you.